The crystal glasses rattled as Richard Sterling's fist hit the mahogany table, his daughter Jessica's tears falling silently onto her untouched $200 plate. "You're an embarrassment to the Sterling name," he snarled, unaware that Marcus, the janitor's 14-year-old son, working an evening shift to help his father, had stopped mopping in the shadows of the exclusive restaurant's hallway. What began as another night of a wealthy man publicly humiliating his only child would transform into something nobody in the restaurant saw coming, a moment of courage that would expose decades of hidden secrets and shake a powerful family's foundation to its core. The security cameras captured every second as Marcus stepped forward, his father's wise words echoing in his mind. But even the other diners couldn't have imagined how this brave young man's next actions would bring one of the city's most influential families to their knees. What dark truth did Marcus discover that made even the mighty Richard Sterling beg for mercy? Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage, justice, and redemption that need to be told. Marcus Washington's hands tightened around the mop handle as he watched Jessica Sterling's tears fall. The elegant dining room of Le Magnifique was nearly empty now, the late evening crowd thinning to just a few wealthy stragglers and, of course, Richard Sterling holding court at his regular table. The restaurant's soft lighting, designed to flatter the rich and powerful, cast strange shadows across the teenager's face as he struggled with what he'd just witnessed. "Keep your head down and your eyes open, son," his father's words echoed. In his mind, James Washington had been head janitor at Le Magnifique for 20 years, maintaining his dignity despite the way some patrons looked right through him. He'd taught Marcus the same quiet strength, showing him how to turn forced invisibility into an advantage. Marcus had started helping his father 3 months ago, when medical bills from his mother's cancer treatments had begun overwhelming their family. The restaurant's owner, Morris, had quietly arranged for Marcus to work evening shifts, paying him under the table since he was too young for legal employment. It was during these shifts that Marcus first noticed Jessica Sterling. She came in with her father every Thursday night, wearing expensive dresses that somehow never quite fit right, as if they'd been chosen for a different girl entirely. While Richard Sterling commanded attention, his daughter seemed to shrink into herself, trying to disappear into the plush dining chairs. Tonight had been different. Jessica had dared to speak during one of her father's business conversations, offering a gentle correction about a historical fact. The backhand had been subtle, quick. Most diners probably hadn't even noticed. But Marcus had seen it all from his position near the service entrance. "Learn to keep your mouth shut," Richard had hissed, his perfect veneers gleaming. "Your mother never learned that lesson either." The mention of Jessica's mother had caught Marcus's attention. He'd never heard Richard Sterling reference his late wife before, though the gossip among the staff painted interesting pictures. Some said she'd died in an accident, others whispered about suicide. But old Maurice, who'd owned Le Magnifique for 30 years, always changed the subject when her name came up. Marcus moved closer under the pretense of cleaning, his mop making slow, deliberate circles on the expensive marble floor. Jessica's shoulders shook with silent sobs as her father continued his business discussion, acting as if his daughter wasn't falling apart 3 feet away from him. From this angle, Marcus could see the red mark on Jessica's cheek, carefully angled, away from the other diners. He thought about his own father, how James Washington's hands were calloused from hard work but had never struck in anger. How he taught Marcus that true strength wasn't in power over others, but in how you lifted people up. "The truth sees the light," his father always said. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but lies have a way of dying in the sunlight." A commotion from the kitchen drew Marcus's attention. His father emerged, pushing his cleaning cart, their signal that it was time to move to the next section. As Marcus began to turn away, something caught his eye. A small leather notebook that had fallen from Richard Sterling's jacket when he'd struck his daughter. Without thinking, Marcus adjusted his path to pass near their table. In one smooth motion, he bent to adjust his shoe, his hand brushing the notebook into his mop bucket. Years of being invisible had taught him how to move without being noticed. "Boy," Richard Sterling's voice cut through the air, "make sure you get that corner clean. I can see spots from here." Marcus straightened, meeting the man's eyes for just a moment. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." But inside something had shifted. The same quiet strength that his father had taught him was now burning with a different purpose. As he pushed his mop toward the kitchen, the notebook heavy in his bucket, Marcus made a decision. He didn't know what secrets Richard Sterling was hiding, but he knew one thing: no one deserved to cry alone in a room full of people who chose not to see them. His father was waiting by the service entrance, understanding in his eyes. "Everything all right, son?" Marcus nodded, but his voice carried a new determination. "Dad, remember when you told me that sometimes God makes us invisible so we can see what others can't?" James Washington studied his son's face carefully. "I remember. I think," Marcus said quietly, "I just saw something I wasn't supposed to see, and I can't unsee it." His father's hand, strong and steady, rested on his shoulder. "Then maybe it's time for someone to start seeing you." The Sterling mansion loomed against the darkening sky, its pristine white columns and manicured gardens a testament to old money and carefully maintained appearances. Inside, Jessica Sterling sat at her vanity, gently dabbing concealer over the mark her father's ring had left. The routine was familiar. She'd learned early how to hide the evidence of his lessons in proper behavior. Her reflection stared back at her, brown eyes so like her mother's, or so the old staff sometimes whispered, when they thought no one was listening. She barely remembered Catherine Sterling anymore. The photographs had all been removed years ago, stored away like shameful secrets in the mansion's vast attic. Richard Sterling's voice carried up from his study below, the sharp tone of another business call cutting through the evening quiet. "Of course the merger will go through, Jenkins. I don't care what their board thinks they found in the audit. I built Sterling Enterprises from nothing, and I won't let some pencil pushers destroy my legacy." Jessica's hands trembled slightly as she opened her desk drawer, pulling out the one photograph of her mother she'd managed to save. Catherine Sterling's smile was radiant, her arms wrapped around a 5-year-old Jessica in their garden. It was taken 3 days before the accident. A soft knock at her door made her quickly hide the photo. Miss Jessica? Maria, their housekeeper, of 20 years, entered with a gentle smile. "Your father wants you dressed for dinner at Le Magnifique. The Chen family will be joining you tonight." Jessica's stomach tightened. The Chens meant business, which meant another evening of being displayed like a porcelain doll while her father negotiated another deal. "Thank you, Maria. The blue Chanel, I suppose?" He specifically requested the red Oscar de la Renta. Maria's eyes held understanding. Red was for important nights when Richard Sterling needed to show off his perfect daughter to seal a deal. As Maria helped her into the dress, Jessica caught glimpses of the security cameras that dotted the mansions. Corridors. They'd been installed after her episode 2 years ago, her father's euphemism for her attempted escape. Now every movement was monitored, every conversation potentially recorded. There was a new boy at the restaurant tonight, Maria mentioned, casually fixing Jessica's hair. The janitor's son. He seemed observant, Jessica remembered him, the way he'd looked at her with something different than the usual pity or indifference. There had been understanding in his eyes, and something else. Something that made her father's carefully constructed world feel suddenly less solid. "I saw him," she said quietly. "He saw me too. Really saw me." Maria's hand stilled for a moment. "Sometimes, Miss Jessica, God sends us angels in unexpected forms." The intercom buzzed harshly, making both women jump. Richard Sterling's voice filled the room. "Jessica, the Chens will be here in 20 minutes. Don't embarrass me tonight. And remember, nothing about the merger discussions. Nothing about your mother. Nothing about the foundation's finances. Just sit, smile, and prove you can be worthy of the Sterling name for once." "Yes, Father," Jessica responded automatically, the words bitter in her mouth. After he clicked off, Maria squeezed her shoulder gently. "Your mother was strong too, you know. Strong enough to start asking questions. Strong enough to keep records. The housekeeper's words were cut off by the sound of Richard Sterling's footsteps in the hallway. But Jessica's mind was already racing. Records? What records? And why had Maria chosen tonight to mention them? Through her window, she could see the Chen family's Rolls-Royce approaching the front gates. Another night of performance was about to begin, but something had shifted. The boy at the restaurant had seen her. Maria knew something about her mother. And somewhere in this massive house, there might be answers to questions she'd been afraid to ask for years. As she descended the grand staircase, her red dress a splash of blood against the white marble, Jessica made a decision. She was tired of being the Sterling puppet, the silent daughter, the living ghost of a woman who had dared to ask questions. "Darling," Richard Sterling called, his public voice warm and artificial. "The Chins are here. Remember to smile." Jessica took her place beside her father, feeling the weight of his hand on her shoulder, a gesture that looked paternal to outsiders but carried a warning she knew too well. Yet for the first time in years, she felt something beyond fear. The boy at the restaurant had seen her, really seen her. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start bringing the truth into the light. "Mr. Chen," Richard Sterling's voice boomed across the foyer. "Welcome to our home. Jessica, darling, say hello to our guests." Jessica smiled, the perfect daughter once again. But inside, something had awakened, something that felt dangerously like hope. The small apartment above Joe's hardware store wasn't much, but to Marcus and his father, it was home. James Washington sat at their worn kitchen table, his cleaning uniform still on, studying his son's face as Marcus carefully removed Richard Sterling's notebook from his mop bucket. "Before you open that," James said quietly, "you need to understand something. Some truths come with a price, son. Once you know them, you can't go back to not knowing." Marcus dried the leather-bound notebook. With a clean cloth, his movements deliberate, like when Mom got sick. "When you told me the truth about the treatments instead of pretending everything would be okay?" James's eyes softened. "Exactly like that. Truth gave you choices. Hard ones, but still choices. That's why you're working at Le Magnifique with me. Now, because you chose to help after knowing the truth about our situation." The kitchen clock ticked steadily as Marcus carefully opened the notebook. Inside, the pages were filled with Richard Sterling's precise handwriting, numbers, dates, and names carefully organized. But what caught Marcus's eye was a newspaper, clipping tucked between the pages, yellowed with age. "Dad?" Marcus's voice wavered slightly. "Look at this." He spread the clipping on the table. "Local philanthropist's wife dies in tragic accident." The photograph showed Catherine Sterling, radiant in an evening gown, standing beside her husband at a charity gala. James leaned forward, his expression changing. "I remember this. It was about 8 years ago. Mrs. Sterling, she used to be different with the staff. Treated us like people, not furniture. She just started asking questions about the foundation's finances. When she had her accident," Marcus finished, scanning the article. "Dad, there's something written in the margins here. Numbers, dates, and look at this name. Chen Global Holdings." James stood abruptly, moving to the small cabinet above, their refrigerator. He retrieved a battered shoebox, placing it carefully on the table. "I've kept something for a long time, son. Wasn't sure when would be the right time to show you." Inside the box were old pay stubs from Le Magnifique, but beneath them lay another newspaper clipping, this one from a small local paper that had gone out of business years ago. The headline read, "Questions surround Sterling Foundation donations." "The night before she died," James said softly, "Mrs. Sterling was at the restaurant. She left something with Maurice, an envelope, said it was insurance. The next morning, he trailed off, his hands clenching slightly." Marcus looked up sharply. "Maurice knows something. Maurice knows a lot of things. That's why Richard Sterling can never force him out, no matter how many health code inspections he sends or how many times he tries to buy the building. That envelope, it's like a sword hanging over Sterling's head, the sound of sirens outside." Their window made both men pause. Their neighborhood wasn't the safest, but they'd learned to find security in each other, in the quiet strength of family holding together against odds. "Jessica," Marcus said suddenly, "she doesn't know any of this, does she? About her mother? About what really happened?" James shook his head. "She was too young, and well, you've seen how Sterling treats her, control through fear, through isolation, just like he tries to control everyone around him." Marcus studied the notebook again, his mind racing. "The Chens are at the Sterling mansion tonight. Dad, look at these numbers. They match the dates in the Foundation article. And here, this notation about Catherine's mistake. Son, James's voice carried a warning. Whatever you're thinking, Sterling is a powerful man. He's hurt people before. The kind of hurt that doesn't leave marks but destroys lives anyway." Marcus thought of Jessica's tears, of the silent way she'd absorbed her father's abuse. He thought of his own mother, fighting cancer in the county hospital because they couldn't afford better care, while men like Sterling used charity foundations to hide their crimes. "You always told me that God makes some people invisible so they can see what others can't," Marcus said, his young voice carrying a maturity beyond his years. "Maybe he also gives some people courage so they can speak what others won't." James studied his son for a long moment. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Maurice opens the restaurant early for inventory on Thursdays. If someone wanted to talk to him privately, that would be the time. And Sterling always brings Jessica for dinner on Thursdays," Marcus added, the pieces starting to align in his mind. Outside, the city lights flickered against their window, casting shadows that seemed to dance with possibility. In the distance, a church bell tolled 9 times, the same church where Marcus's mother had taught him that sometimes faith means standing up when the whole world tells you to stay down. "Whatever you're planning," James said quietly, "remember what your mother always said, truth without compassion is just another form of violence." Marcus closed the notebook carefully. "I remember, Dad, and I think Mom would want us to help Jessica, to help her see the truth about her own mother." Father and son sat in understanding silence, the weight of what was to come settling around them like a mantle of responsibility. Sometimes, Marcus realized, courage doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I see you," to someone who has been invisible for far too long. Dawn hadn't yet broken when Marcus arrived at Le Magnifique the next morning. Maurice, the restaurant's owner, was already there, his aged hands methodically counting wine bottles in the cellar. The old man didn't seem surprised to see Marcus, as if he'd been expecting this moment for years. "You found Sterling's notebook," Maurice said. It wasn't a question. His accent, a mixture of French and decades in America, made the words sound both gentle and knowing. "And now, you want to know about Catherine." Marcus clutched his father's shoebox of clippings. "I want to know the truth. About Mrs. Sterling, about the foundation, about why Jessica flinches every time her father raises his voice." Maurice set down his inventory list, his eyes distant. "Truth is not simple, young Marcus. Catherine Sterling discovered this. She thought exposing corruption would be like turning on a light. Immediate, illuminating. Instead, he gestured for Marcus to follow him to his office. The restaurant's office was small, but meticulously organized. Maurice unlocked a hidden panel behind his desk, revealing a small safe. "Catherine came to me 8 years ago. She had discovered discrepancies in the Foundation's books. Money meant for children's hospitals, for cancer research for families, like yours, all disappearing into offshore accounts." Marcus thought of his mother, fighting cancer in an underfunded county hospital. His hands tightened into fists. "She left something with you," Marcus said. "An envelope." Maurice nodded slowly. "Insurance, she called it. Proof of everything." The next day, his voice trailed off. "The police called it an accident. Brake failure. On mountain roads, very tragic, very convenient. And the envelope is the only reason Le Magnifique still stands, why Richard Sterling can't touch us." Maurice's eyes hardened. "But it's not enough, not anymore, not with what he's doing to Jessica." Marcus spread out the notebook's contents on Maurice's desk. "These numbers, they match the dates in the Foundation article. And look, The Chen family's involvement, the merger discussions. Ah, the Chens. Maurice's expression grew concerned. They're not just business partners. Mr. Chen was Catherine's friend before. He's been trying to gain control of the foundation to make things right, but Sterling has leverage. The morning light was beginning to filter through the office windows as Marcus connected the dots. Jessica. He's using his own daughter as leverage? Maurice nodded grimly. The Foundation's charter has strict rules. Control passes to Jessica when she turns 18, unless she's deemed unstable or unfit. Every public humiliation, every private torment, it's all documented, all building a case. 3 more years, Marcus whispered. She just has. To survive 3 more years until she's 18. If she survives at all. Maurice's voice was heavy. Catherine didn't raise her to be silent, to be broken. That fire, that strength, it's still there. Sterling sees it, fears it. That's why the abuse gets worse. Marcus thought of Jessica's tears, of the quiet dignity in her silence. We have to help her. Show her the truth about her mother, about everything. It's dangerous, Maurice warned. Sterling has eyes everywhere. The restaurant cameras, the mansion security, his business associates. But he doesn't see us, Marcus countered. The invisible ones, the cleaners, the servers, the people he looks right through. We can move in his blind spots. Maurice studied the young man before him, seeing perhaps a reflection of Catherine's determination. The Chens are coming back tonight. Another business dinner, another show of Sterling's perfect family. But this time will be different, Marcus finished. He pulled out his phone, showing Maurice a video he'd secretly recorded of Sterling's outburst, of Jessica's tears. We're not the only ones watching anymore. Maurice's eyes widened slightly. The security cameras. You found the blind spots. Dad taught me well. Always know where the cameras are, he says. Both to avoid them and to use them. The old restaurateur was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he stood, moving to his safe again. Catherine would have liked you, Marcus. Your courage, your compassion. He withdrew a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Perhaps it's time this found its way into the right hands. Outside, the city was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled past. Early commuters hurried by. Another day of wealth and power playing out in the visible world. But here, in this small office, the invisible ones were finally ready to step into the light. Tonight, Maurice said, his voice carrying the weight of 8 years of waiting. When the Chens arrive, Sterling will be focused on the merger, on maintaining control. That's when we show Jessica who she really is, her mother's daughter. Marcus took the envelope carefully, feeling the weight of truth in his hands. And the security cameras will catch everything. Maurice's smile was grim. Sometimes, young Marcus, the best way to fight power is to let it destroy itself. The morning sun broke fully through the windows, casting long shadows across the office. In a few hours, the restaurant would fill with the wealthy and powerful, all playing their parts in Sterling's carefully orchestrated world. But beneath that polished surface, the truth was finally stirring, ready to rise like a tide that no amount of money or power could hold back. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he opened Catherine Sterling's envelope in the restaurant's empty wine cellar. His father stood watch at the top of the stairs while Morris sorted through the contents on an old oak barrel. The morning light filtered through small ground-level windows, casting long shadows across the dusty bottles. Mon Dieu, Maurice whispered, lifting out a photograph. I haven't seen this in years. The image showed a younger Richard Sterling standing with Catherine and a group of Foundation board members. But it was the background that caught Marcus's attention. A whiteboard visible in the corner, covered with numbers and offshore account details. Someone, presumably Catherine, had thought to capture this seemingly innocent moment, knowing its true value. Look at the date, James Washington said, pointing to the timestamp, 3 days before her death. But Marcus was studying something else in the photo, a familiar face among the board members. That's Mr. Chen. He looks different somehow. Younger? Yes, Maurice nodded. But look at his expression, how he's watching Catherine. He knew something was wrong even then. The envelope contained more than photographs. Bank statements, transfer records, and most damning of all, a handwritten letter from Catherine Sterling herself, dated the day she died. To whoever finds these documents, if you're reading this, I am likely no longer alive to expose the truth. Myself. The Sterling Foundation, created to help those in need, has become a front for something far more sinister. Richard has been systematically diverting funds, using our charity to launder money for private interests. But worse than the financial crimes is what this has done to our daughter. Jessica watches, learns, sees everything. Richard knows this. It's why he's begun to break her spirit, to ensure she'll never be strong enough to take control when she comes of age. I've gathered evidence, copied documents, tracked transactions. Mr. Chen has been helping me quietly, but Richard suspects. The threats have begun. If anything happens to me, look closer at the brake lines on my car. Look closer at everything. Most importantly, protect Jessica. She is her mother's daughter, stronger than Richard knows. When the time comes, show her these documents. Show her that her mother didn't abandon her. I fought for her until the end, with hope and faith. Catherine Sterling. Marcus looked up from the letter, his young face set with determination. She knew he would try to kill her, and she still fought. Oui, Maurice said softly. Catherine was brave, but also smart. She left copies of everything, distributed among those she trusted. The envelope I kept was just one piece. And Mr. Chen has another, James added, understanding dawning. That's why he's been trying to gain control of the foundation. He's been waiting for the right moment to expose everything. A noise from upstairs made them all freeze. The cellar door opened and footsteps descended. Marcus quickly gathered the documents, but before he could hide them, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Maria, the Sterling's housekeeper, her eyes wide with urgency. "Thank God I found you. Jessica's in trouble." The group gathered around as Maria caught her breath. Sterling found her this morning in Catherine's old study. She discovered some old photographs, letters. He was furious. "I've never seen him like this." "Is she hurt?" Marcus demanded, his voice tight. "Not physically, not yet. But he's bringing her to the restaurant tonight, insisting she attend the Chen meeting. He's going to force her to sign something, some kind of document, declaring she's mentally unfit to inherit." Maurice swore softly in French. "If she signs, everything Catherine fought for will be for nothing," Marcus finished. He looked at the photograph again, at Catherine Sterling's determined face. "But she won't sign. Not after she sees these." "Marcus," his father warned, "if Sterling realizes we have these documents—" "He won't," Marcus said firmly. "Not until it's too late. Look at this photo again. The security camera angles, the blind spots. Catherine wasn't just documenting the fraud. She was leaving us a blueprint." Maria touched the letter gently. "I watched that woman love her daughter through impossible choices, watched her fight until the very end. And now we finish what she started," Marcus declared. He turned to Morris. "The Chen dinner tonight? What time?" 7 o'clock. Sterling insisted on the private dining room. "The one with the hidden service entrance?" Marcus nodded. "Where the cameras don't reach." He looked at his father. "Dad, remember what Mom always said about darkness?" James Washington smiled slightly. "That it's only powerful until someone turns on the light." The group huddled closer as Marcus outlined his plan. Above them, Le Magnifique was coming alive with the sounds of morning preparation. Soon the wealthy and powerful would arrive, expecting another day of being catered to in their carefully controlled world. But in the cellar's shadows, the invisible ones were preparing a different kind of service, one that would shatter Richard Sterling's perfect facade and finally bring Catherine's last fight into the light. "For Jessica," Marcus said softly, touching the photograph one last time. "For Jessica," they echoed, their whispered voices carrying the weight of 8 years of waiting justice. The hours before dinner service at Le Magnifique moved with agonizing slowness. Marcus positioned himself near the service entrance, methodically polishing water glasses while watching the staff's practiced choreography. Every few minutes, his hand would brush against his pocket, feeling the reassuring weight of Catherine's documents. Sarah, a veteran server who'd worked at the restaurant since Jessica was a toddler, stopped beside him under the pretense of collecting clean glasses. "Kitchen staff's on board," she whispered. "Carlos has positioned the cart exactly where you asked, blocking Camera 3's view of the private dining room's back entrance." Marcus nodded slightly, continuing his methodical polishing. The restaurant staff had mobilized with quiet efficiency once Maurice gave the word. Years of watching Sterling's abuse of Jessica, of carrying their own guilt for staying silent, had created an underground network of allies just waiting for a chance to act. Mr. Chen's assistant called to confirm the reservation, Sarah continued. He specifically requested their usual server, Antonio, be replaced by Lisa tonight. This was significant. Lisa had been Catherine Sterling's favorite server years ago. She'd witnessed countless private moments between mother and daughter, including their last dinner together the night before the accident. James Washington appeared with his cleaning cart, his movements deliberately slow as he passed his son. "Security feeds are looped for the back corridor. Maurice's IT guy confirmed it. You'll have exactly 4 minutes when the time comes." Marcus thought of the photograph in his pocket, of Catherine Sterling's last letter, of Jessica's tears and silent strength. 4 minutes to change everything. 4 minutes to honor a dead woman's courage and save her daughter. The afternoon light slanted through Le Magnifique's elegant windows, creating pools of gold on the pristine tablecloths. In the kitchen, Chef Michel was preparing Sterling's usual order, a power move, having the food ready before it was requested. But tonight, the timing would serve a different purpose. Maurice's voice made him turn. The restaurant owner stood in his office doorway, beckoning. Inside, the small room had been transformed. A laptop connected to the restaurant's security system showed multiple camera feeds. On the desk lay printed copies of Catherine's documents, insurance against anything happening to the originals. "The Chens arrive at 7, Maurice said, his accent thicker with tension. "Sterling and Jessica at 7:15. That's when Richard always makes his power play, keeping important guests waiting." He pointed to a camera feed showing the private dining room. "Camera 2 covers the main entrance. 3 is blocked by Carlos's cart. 4 and 5, he smiled slightly, will experience unfortunate technical difficulties at precisely 7:20. The exact time Sterling always starts discussing business," Marcus added, remembering the pattern from countless Thursday nights. And tonight's business." Maurice handed Marcus a folded newspaper article. It was from that morning's financial section. "Sterling Foundation under federal scrutiny. Anonymous source reveals potential investigation." Marcus's eyes widened. "Mr. Chen?" Setting the stage, Maurice nodded. "Richard will be distracted, desperate to maintain control." That's when a knock interrupted them. Maria slipped inside, still in her housekeeper's uniform. "Jessica found more photos this morning, hidden in her mother's old books. She's starting to piece things together on her own, but Richard..." She twisted her hands anxiously. "He's bringing the Foundation's lawyer tonight. The papers are already drawn up." Marcus felt a cold anger settle in his chest. "He's going to force her to sign away her inheritance, her mother's legacy." "Not just that," Maria's voice cracked. "He's arranged for her to be committed. A private residential facility for troubled youth. The papers declare her mentally unstable, unable to manage her own affairs. Once she signs..." "She won't," Marcus said firmly. "Not after she sees these." He touched the documents in his pocket. "Not after she learns the truth about her mother." The group fell silent as footsteps passed. Maurice's office. Through the small window, they watched Richard Sterling himself stride through the restaurant's front door 6 hours before his dinner reservation. His face was tight with barely controlled rage. "Maurice!" His voice carried that familiar tone of entitled demand. "A word about tonight's arrangements." Maurice squeezed Marcus's shoulder before stepping out. "Mr. Sterling, what a surprise." Marcus watched through the office window as Sterling launched into his usual list of requirements. But something was different today. The man's perfect. Mask was slipping, showing edges of desperation. "He's scared," Maria whispered. For the first time in 8 years, Richard Sterling is actually scared. Marcus thought of Jessica, probably alone in that massive mansion, waiting for another night of public performance and private terror. Of Catherine Sterling, who died trying to protect her daughter. Of his own mother, fighting cancer in an underfunded hospital while men like Sterling diverted charity funds to offshore accounts. Good, he said quietly. He should be scared, because tonight, the invisible ones step into the light. In his pocket, Catherine's letter seemed to pulse with purpose. Outside, the afternoon sun caught the crystal glasses he'd been polishing, sending prisms of light dancing across the walls. In a few hours, the wealthy and powerful would arrive, expecting another evening of maintaining their carefully constructed illusions. But beneath the elegant surface of Le Magnifique, truth was rising like a tide, and no amount of power, money, or carefully positioned security cameras could stop what was coming. 7 o'clock arrived with the precision of a well-orchestrated play. The Chen family entered Le Magnifique first, Mr. Chen, elegant in a tailored suit, his wife Grace carrying herself with quiet dignity, and their teenage daughter May, whose eyes swept the restaurant with unusual awareness for someone her age. Marcus watched from his position near the service entrance as Maurice personally escorted them to the private dining room. Mr. Chen's face betrayed nothing, but his hand brushed deliberately against his jacket pocket, where a copy of the morning's financial article lay hidden. At exactly 7:15, right on schedule, Richard Sterling's unmistakable footsteps echoed through the restaurant's entrance. Jessica walked 2 precise steps behind him, wearing a deep blue dress that made her look even paler than usual. But something was different tonight. Her eyes held a new awareness, a barely concealed storm. "She knows something," Sarah whispered as she passed Marcus with a tray of water glasses. "Look at how she's walking, like she's ready to run." Marcus nodded imperceptibly. Maria had said Jessica found more photos that morning. The daughter of Catherine Sterling was finally awakening to her own truth, and Richard Sterling's carefully constructed world was about to shatter. "Mr. Chen," Sterling's voice carried across the restaurant, perfectly modulated to project both authority and false warmth. "I apologize for our slight delay. City traffic, you understand?" Mr. Chen rose, his own smile equally practiced. "Of course, though I was just telling my daughter about your wife Catherine. She never kept anyone waiting, did she?" The barb was subtle but direct. Sterling's face tightened for a fraction of a second before his mask slipped back into place. "Jessica, darling, sit beside Mrs. Chen. I believe May is about your age." Jessica moved to her assigned seat, but her hands were trembling slightly as she arranged her napkin. May Chen watched her with unconcealed interest, clearly noting every detail of the other girl's controlled distress. Marcus began his practiced routine, moving through the service area while staying in the camera's blind spots. Through the partially open door, he could hear the conversation starting. Pleasantries about wine selections, comments about the weather, the careful dance of power and pretense. "The market has been quite interesting lately," Mr. Chen commented casually. "Particularly this morning's financial news. Have you seen it, Richard?" Sterling's response was cut off by the arrival of Chef Michel with the first course, perfectly timed to interrupt at exactly this moment. Marcus used the distraction to slide closer to the service entrance, watching through the gap as Sterling pulled out a thick envelope and placed it on the table. "Before we discuss business," Sterling said, his voice carrying that dangerous edge, Marcus had come to recognize there's a small family matter to address. "Jessica, darling, these papers merely formalize what we discussed this morning about your special needs." Jessica's hands clenched in her lap. "The papers about sending me away, you mean? About declaring me unfit?" The bluntness of her response clearly startled Sterling. Around the table, the atmosphere shifted. Mrs. Chen's hand moved to cover her daughters protectively, while Mr. Chen leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharp. "Jessica," Sterling's voice carried a warning. "We agreed." "No, Father, you agreed. Just like you agreed 8 years ago that Mother's death was an accident." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the usual restaurant sound seemed muted, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Marcus signaled silently to Carlos, who moved his cart slightly, completing the camera blind spot they'd carefully planned. Sterling recovered quickly, his smile now razor-thin. "My dear, your mother's death was tragic, but your recent obsession with conspiracy theories only proves what these doctors have been saying. You're becoming unstable, just like she was toward the end." "Unstable?" Jessica's voice rose slightly. "Is that what you called it when she started asking questions about the Foundation's missing millions? About the offshore accounts? About the children's hospital funding that disappeared?" Mr. Chen set down his wineglass with deliberate care. "Richard, perhaps we should discuss—" "This is a private family matter," Sterling cut him off, his control visibly slipping. He pulled out a pen, sliding it across to Jessica. "Sign the papers, now!" Marcus watched as Jessica's hand moved toward the pen, saw the moment when her father's years of conditioning nearly won out. But then something changed in her expression, a flash of her mother's strength. "No." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Sterling's face darkened. "You don't have a choice." "She always has a choice," a new voice spoke from the doorway. Marcus stepped into the light, Catherine Sterling's envelope in his hand. Just like her mother had a choice 8 years ago, when she decided that truth was worth dying for. The security cameras whirred quietly above, capturing every moment of what was about to unfold. In his pocket, Marcus's phone was already recording, ensuring that this time there would be no convenient accidents, no buried truths. Richard Sterling turned slowly, his face a mask of fury as he confronted the janitor's son who dared to interrupt his carefully orchestrated evening. "How dare you!" But Marcus was already moving toward Jessica, the envelope extended like a lifeline. "Your mother left something for you," he said softly. "It's time you knew the truth." The private dining room crackled with electric tension as Jessica reached for the envelope with trembling hands. Richard Sterling moved to intercept, but Mr. Chen was faster, smoothly positioning himself between them. "Let her read it, Richard." Chen's voice was soft but carried an unmistakable steel edge. "Let her see what her mother wanted her to know." Sterling's face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. You're going to believe the janitor's boy? Some fabricated... They're not fabricated," Maurice's voice cut through as he entered the room. "These are copies. The originals are quite safe, along with Catherine's other documents. The ones she distributed 8 years ago, before you had her killed." Jessica's fingers traced her mother's handwriting on the envelope. "You told me she was unstable," she whispered, her voice gathering strength. "That she crashed her car because she was emotionally disturbed, but she wasn't unstable, was she, Father?" She was gathering evidence. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had stilled, watching through the service entrance. Sterling's lawyer, who had been quietly observing from the corner, started to speak, but Sterling silenced him with a savage gesture. "Everything I did," Sterling's voice shook with barely controlled fury. "I did to protect our legacy. Your mother didn't understand the complexities, the necessities of maintaining our position." "Necessities?" Jessica's voice cracked as she pulled out the photographs. "Was it necessary to steal millions from children's hospitals? From cancer research?" Her eyes found Marcus. "From families who couldn't afford treatment for their sick mothers?" Marcus felt his own anger rise, thinking of his mother fighting cancer in an underfunded ward while Sterling lived in luxury. But he kept his voice steady. "Show them the whiteboard photo, Jessica, the one with the offshore account numbers." She found it, gasping softly. This was taken in Father's study, 3 days before. Her eyes lifted to Mr. Chen. "You're in this photo." "You knew?" Chen nodded gravely. "Your mother came to me first, showing me the discrepancies. I've spent 8 years trying to gain enough control of the Foundation to expose the truth without putting you at risk. But your father's threats to have you declared unstable, to erase you just like he erased Catherine—" "You self-righteous fool," Sterling snarled at Chen. "You have no idea what's at stake. The power we could wield together, the influence—" "The only thing at stake," Marcus interrupted, stepping closer to Jessica, "is whether justice will finally be served, whether Catherine Sterling's daughter will finally know the truth about her mother's courage, Sterling's laugh was ugly. Justice? You want justice, boy? Let me show you what justice looks like in the real world. He reached into his jacket, but before he could withdraw what everyone feared was a weapon, a new voice spoke from the doorway. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," the voice announced clearly. "Mr. Sterling, please keep your hands where we can." "See them." 2 agents stepped into the room, their badges gleaming. Behind them stood James Washington, his face solemn. "I'm sorry it took 8 years," he said quietly to Jessica. But your mother's evidence is finally in the right hands." Sterling's face went from red to ashen. "You can't. I have connections, influence." "What you have," the lead agent interrupted, "is a long list of federal charges: money laundering, embezzlement, conspiracy, and now, thanks to tonight's recording, enough evidence to reopen the investigation into Catherine Sterling's death." Jessica stood slowly, her mother's letter clutched to her chest. Her voice, when it came, carried Catherine's strength. "All these years you made me believe I was like her, unstable, emotional, weak. But she was the strongest person in this room, wasn't she? Strong enough to stand up to you, to fight for what was right." Tears streamed down her face, but her voice never wavered. "She didn't die because she was unstable. She died because she was brave, because she chose truth over power, justice over privilege." She turned to Marcus. "And you chose to be brave too, to risk everything to help someone you barely knew." The agents were moving forward with handcuffs as Sterling made one last desperate play. "Jessica, darling, you can't believe these lies. I'm your father." "No," Jessica cut him off. "You're the man who killed my mother, who tried to break my spirit just like you tried to break hers." She straightened to her full height, suddenly looking so much like Catherine that several staff members gasped. "But you failed, because I am my mother's daughter, and today her fight for justice finally ends." As the agents led Sterling away, the private dining room erupted in controlled chaos. The lawyer fled, phones emerged to capture the moment, and staff members moved in to support Jessica. But Marcus watched as she stood in the center of it all. Her mother's truth finally setting her free, Mr. Chen approached her gently. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Jessica, and if you'll allow it, Grace and I would be honored to help you take your rightful place at the Foundation's helm." Outside in the main restaurant, diners were standing, whispers spreading like wildfire. The mighty Richard Sterling led away in handcuffs, his daughter standing tall in the aftermath. And through it all, the quiet strength of those who had waited years for justice to finally prevail. Marcus felt his father's hand on his shoulder. "Your mother would be proud too, son. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage come from those the powerful never thought to fear." The evening light slanted through Le Magnifique's windows, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with possibility. In the private dining room, Jessica Sterling held her mother's truth in her hands, finally free to become the woman Catherine had died protecting. The next morning's headlines exploded across every major news outlet. "Sterling Empire Crumbles, Charity Foundation, CEO Arrested in Dramatic Restaurant Confrontation." But it was the smaller local paper that captured the true heart of the story. Mother's legacy of truth finally sets daughter free. Le Magnifique's private dining room had been transformed into a temporary FBI command center. Agents moved efficiently through mountains of evidence as Jessica sat with Marcus and the Chens, watching 8 years of secrets unfold before her eyes. The Foundation's real books were hidden in plain sight, Agent Sarah Martinez explained, spreading documents across the table. "Your mother found them disguised as old accounting records in the mansion's library. Every missing dollar, every diverted donation, she tracked them all." Jessica touched a photograph of her mother's handwriting. "She knew she was in danger, didn't she? That's why she left copies with different people." "Smart woman," Mr. Chen nodded. "She gave me financial records, Maurice got the proof of threats, and the original accident report." He glanced at James Washington, who stood quietly by the service entrance. "I was working late that night," James said softly. "Saw Sterling make a call from the restaurant's back office. 20 minutes later, we heard about the brake failure." His hands clenched. "I've carried that knowledge for 8 years, waiting for the right moment, the right evidence. Marcus watched Jessica absorb each new revelation. The terror of the previous night had transformed into something else, a quiet strength that reminded him more and more of the woman in the photographs. "There's something else you should see," Agent Martinez said, pulling out a laptop. "Security. Footage from the mansion, going back years. Your father thought he was documenting your instability for the commitment papers. Instead, he was recording evidence of systematic abuse. The videos played silently, Richard Sterling's calculated humiliations, the public breakdowns he'd orchestrated, the careful destruction of his daughter's confidence. But they also showed something he hadn't intended: Jessica's resilience, her small acts of defiance, her mother's spirit burning through despite everything. "Turn it off," Jessica said suddenly. "I don't need to see more. I lived it." She stood, moving to the restaurant's window. "What I need now is to make it right. All of it." Mr. Chen joined her. "The foundation board is meeting in an hour. With Sterling's arrest and this evidence, control reverts to you immediately. No waiting until you're 18. "I'll need help," Jessica said. "I don't know anything about running a foundation." "That's not true," Marcus spoke up. Everyone turned to look at him. "You know the most important thing, the difference between power and justice, between silence and truth." Grace Chen smiled warmly. "Marcus is right, and you'll have support. The board, our family, the community that stood silently behind you all these years." A commotion at the restaurant's entrance drew their attention. News crews had gathered, hoping to catch a glimpse of the story that was captivating the nation. But it was the smaller group behind them that made Jessica catch her breath. Families, dozens of them, holding signs and photographs. "They're from the Children's Hospital," Maurice explained, entering with fresh coffee. "Families who lost funding when your father diverted the money. They've been calling all morning ever since the news broke, not asking for anything, just wanting to share their stories, to thank you and Marcus for bringing the truth to light." Jessica's hands trembled as she read some of the signs. "Catherine Sterling's fight was not in vain," and "Thank you for being brave," and "Justice comes through courage." "Mom would have been here," Marcus said quietly, thinking of his own mother fighting cancer in the county hospital. "She always said that sometimes God's justice works through unexpected hands." Agent Martinez's phone buzzed. "Sterling's talking," she reported, "trying to cut a deal. He's naming names, exposing co-conspirators. The whole network is unraveling. Let it unravel," Jessica said firmly. "Let all the truth come out. No more shadows, no more secrets." The morning sun streamed through Le Magnifique's windows, catching the crystal glasses that Marcus had polished just yesterday, a lifetime ago it seemed. The same light touched Jessica's face, highlighting her transformation from victim to victor. "The press will want a statement," Mr. Chen said gently. "They're already calling you the princess who reclaimed her kingdom." Jessica shook her head. "I'm not a princess, and this isn't about reclaiming power. It's about fulfilling my mother's legacy, about using the foundation the way it was meant to be used, to help people, to fight injustice, to speak truth to power." She turned to Marcus. "Will you help me? Your perspective, your understanding of what families really need, it's invaluable." Marcus thought about his father's lessons in quiet dignity, his mother's battle with cancer, the years of watching silently as power corrupted everything it touched. "Yes," he said simply, "together." Outside, the crowd of supporters had grown. Among them, Marcus spotted familiar faces: restaurant staff who'd kept secrets for years, hospital workers who'd witnessed the impact of Sterling's greed, community members awakening to the power of truth. The evidence of Richard Sterling's crimes spread across the dining room table like a map of corruption. But beside it lay something more powerful: Catherine Sterling's letters, photographs, and final testimony, a mother's love preserved in paper and ink, finally fulfilling its purpose, setting her daughter free to become the force for good she was always meant to be. The Sterling Foundation's boardroom felt different now. Gone was the oppressive silence that had marked Richard Sterling's reign. Instead, voices filled the oak-paneled room as Jessica sat at the head of the table, her mother's diary open before her. Around her, board members who had stayed quiet for years finally found their courage to speak. "He threatened all of us," Thomas Reynolds, the foundation's longtime accountant, admitted. His hand shook as he pushed forward another stack of documents. Not just with financial ruin. He knew things, used private investigators to dig up dirt. But your mother, she was the only one brave enough to stand up to him. Marcus stood by the wall, watching Jessica absorb each new revelation. He wasn't supposed to be in this meeting, but she had insisted. "He stays," she had said when some board members objected. "He's the reason we're all here," finally speaking the truth. The Cancer Research Division was the first target, Dr. Sarah Chen, Mr. Chen's sister and head of medical grants, explained. Richard redirected those funds so gradually that at first we didn't see the pattern, but Catherine did. She tracked every dollar, every delayed grant, every desperate family turned away. Jessica opened a folder marked "Priority Cases Denied." Inside were photographs, letters, medical records, the human cost of her father's greed. Her fingers stopped on a familiar name, Washington. "Marie, Marcus's mother," she whispered, looking up at him. "She was supposed to receive treatment funding," Marcus nodded slowly. "Stage 3 breast cancer. The foundation's grant would have given her access to experimental treatment at Preston Memorial. Instead, she's fighting for her life. In the county hospital," Jessica finished. She stood suddenly, her voice finding new strength. "This ends today. Every denied case will be reviewed. Every diverted dollar will be traced. Every family that suffered because of my father's crimes will be contacted and made whole." The boardroom doors opened as FBI agents wheeled in more evidence boxes. Agent Martinez entered with fresh news. "Sterling's confession is expanding. He's implicated 3 other foundation directors across the state, all running similar schemes. This is bigger than we thought." "Of course it is," a new voice said. Everyone turned to see Maurice in the doorway, carrying a worn leather briefcase. Catherine knew that too. That's why she didn't just investigate Richard. She followed the whole network. He placed the briefcase on the table, opening it carefully. Inside were 8 years' worth of Catherine Sterling's private investigation. Photographs, recorded conversations, bank transfers that linked corrupt foundation directors across the country. Mom built a complete case, Jessica realized, touching the papers reverently. She wasn't just trying to expose father, she was trying to expose the entire system. A system that's been preying on desperate families for decades, Mr. Chen added, using charitable foundations as personal piggy banks while people like Marcus's mother suffer the consequences. The room fell silent as the scope of Catherine Sterling's final mission became clear. She hadn't died trying to expose one man's crimes. She had died trying to tear down an entire network of corruption. "There's more," James Washington said quietly from the doorway. He'd taken the day off from Le Magnifique to support his son. "The night your mother died, she called the restaurant, asked to speak to Maurice. She said something about the final piece, evidence that would bring down not just Richard, but everyone involved." Jessica's hands trembled as she opened her mother's diary to the last entry, dated the day she died. The proof is complete, all of it. The offshore accounts, the fake charities, the political bribes. Richard thinks he's untouchable, protected by money and influence. But he forgot the most important lesson. Truth doesn't care about power, it only cares about coming to light. The words seemed to hang in the air, Catherine's voice reaching across 8 years to guide her daughter. Jessica looked around the room, at the board members finding their courage, at the FBI agents uncovering years of deception, at Marcus and his father standing tall in their quiet dignity. "My father thought he could bury the truth along with my mother," she said, her voice growing stronger. "He thought if he broke me, controlled me, convinced me I was unstable, her evidence would stay hidden forever." She smiled, a flash of Catherine's determination shining through. "But he forgot something essential." "What's that?" Marcus asked softly. "That truth, like love, passes from mother to daughter. That courage, like justice, only grows stronger in darkness. She stood straighter, every inch Catherine's heir. My father didn't just steal money, he stole hope from families like yours, Marcus. He stole futures, dreams, chances at life. She turned to Agent Martinez. How many foundations are implicated so far? 7 confirmed. Possibly more. Then, we have work to do. Jessica's voice carried the same quiet authority that had marked her mother's final recordings. Every foundation will be audited. Every victim will be heard. Every stolen dollar will be traced and returned. Outside the boardroom windows, the city skyline stretched toward a brightening sky. Somewhere in that urban landscape, families like Marcus's were fighting battles that money could have prevented. But now finally, Catherine Sterling's last fight was being finished by the daughter she had died protecting. The silence was broken, and in its place, truth was rising like a tide that would wash away decades of corruption, one revealed secret at a time. The federal courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, but it was the other group that caught everyone's attention. Dozens of families holding photographs of loved ones, each one a victim of the foundation's diverted funds. Marcus stood, with his father near the back, his mother's hospital photo held carefully in his hands. Inside, Richard Sterling's bail hearing had become something much larger. As Jessica took the witness stand, her voice carried through the packed courtroom with unwavering clarity. "My father didn't just steal money," she testified, her hand steady on the Bible. "He stole lives. Every dollar he diverted from cancer research, every grant he denied to desperate families, these weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were death sentences handed down from a mahogany desk." The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire Bennett, displayed Catherine's recovered documents on the courtroom screens. "And when your mother discovered these diversions, he killed her." Jessica's words cut through the courtroom's hushed atmosphere. But first, he tried to destroy her credibility, just like he tried to destroy mine. Called her unstable, emotional, unfit. The same words he used in those commitment papers he tried to force me to sign. Richard Sterling sat between his lawyers, his perfect posture finally cracking. The designer suit couldn't hide his unraveling composure as his daughter's testimony continued. "We've received documentation of similar patterns at 7 other foundations," Prosecutor Bennett announced, "all connected to Mr. Sterling's network, all using the same methods to divert funds meant for critical medical care." From his position in the gallery, Marcus watched Sterling's face as the evidence mounted. The security footage from Le Magnifique played silently. The years of public humiliation, the carefully orchestrated breakdowns, the systematic destruction of Jessica's confidence. "The defendant didn't just commit financial crimes," Bennett continued. "He orchestrated a years-long campaign of psychological abuse against his own daughter, all to prevent her from discovering the truth about her mother's murder." Sterling's lawyer jumped up. "Objection! There's been no murder charge filed." Yet, Agent Martinez said clearly from her seat near the prosecution table, "but the new evidence from Catherine Sterling's hidden files has given us probable cause to reopen the investigation into her death." The judge, a veteran of the federal bench named Howard Matthews, leaned forward. "Given the extent of these allegations and the defendant's apparent efforts to intimidate witnesses, bail is denied. Mr. Sterling will remain in custody pending trial." As the gavel fell, a small sound escaped Sterling's throat, the first crack in his perfect facade. But it was his daughter's next words that shattered him completely. "I have one more thing to say." Jessica stood, pulling out her mother's diary. "This isn't just about justice for my mother or for me. It's about every family represented by those photos outside, every patient denied treatment, every research grant canceled, every life cut short by greed." She opened the diary to a marked page. "My mother wrote this the day she died. Richard thinks money equals power, that wealth can silence truth. But he forgot that some things are stronger than money: love, justice, and the courage to stand up when the world tells you to stay silent." The courtroom erupted in controlled chaos as Sterling was led away. Outside, the crowd on the courthouse steps had grown, News cameras captured the moment as Jessica emerged, walking straight to where Marcus stood with his father. "The Foundation's board just voted," she told them, her voice carrying to the assembled reporters. "Every denied grant is being reviewed, starting with your mother's case, Marcus. She'll be transferred to Preston Memorial tomorrow, full treatment coverage, everything she needs." Marcus felt his father's hand grip his shoulder as tears threatened. But it was the next announcement that caused the crowd to burst into applause. "Furthermore," Jessica continued, "we're establishing the Catherine Sterling Whistleblower Fund. Every foundation implicated in this scheme will be required to contribute. The money will support families who expose corruption, who choose truth over silence." Cameras flashed as Jessica hugged Marcus, the photos capturing a moment that would appear in newspapers across the country. The wealthy heiress and the janitor's son united in their fight for justice. "Your mother would be proud," James Washington said softly to Jessica. "Both of you," he added, looking at his son. The autumn wind whipped around the courthouse columns as more families approached, each carrying their stories of loss and hope. A mother whose child had been denied experimental treatment, a researcher whose promising cancer study lost funding. All of them, Marcus realized, had been waiting for this moment when truth finally broke through money's careful walls. "This is just the beginning," Jessica told the crowd. "Every foundation, every charity, every organization that betrayed the public trust, we're coming for all of them. Because my mother taught me that true power isn't in what you can take, it's in what you choose to give back." As the sun set behind the courthouse, casting long shadows across Justice's steps, Marcus thought about how it had all started, with a simple act of seeing someone's pain, of choosing to stand up when others looked away. Sometimes, he realized, the biggest changes start with the smallest choices, and sometimes justice comes not from the powerful, but from those they never thought to fear. The Federal Detention Center's visiting room was cold and stark, a far cry from the luxurious spaces Richard Sterling once commanded. Jessica sat straight-backed in the metal chair, her mother's diary placed deliberately on the table between them. Marcus waited outside with Agent Martinez, having promised to be there when she finished. Sterling shuffled in wearing orange, his perfectly manicured hands now adorned with handcuffs instead of gold rings. For a moment, father and daughter studied each other through the thick glass. Power stripped away, pretense finally fallen. "I suppose," Sterling said, his voice lacking its usual authority. "You've come to gloat." "No." Jessica's voice was calm, controlled. "I came to return something." She held up a stack of papers, the commitment papers he'd tried to force her to sign. "These belong to you, along with all the other lies you've told." Sterling's jaw tightened. "Everything I did was for power," Jessica cut him off. "Not for legacy, not for family, and certainly not for me." She opened her mother's diary. "I found Mom's private journals, all of them, including her entries about the night you threatened her life if she didn't stop investigating the foundation." Color drained from Sterling's face. "You can't prove the garage security cameras," Jessica continued, relentless now. "The ones you thought you'd erased? Mom had already transferred the footage. You threatening her, demanding she sign over her foundation voting rights, warning her about accidents that happened to troublesome wives." She placed a photograph on the table. Catherine Sterling at her last charity gala, radiant and determined. "You didn't just kill her body, you tried to kill her truth, her legacy, then you tried to do the same to me. I made you strong." Sterling hissed, a flash of the old anger returning. "Everything I did was to toughen you for the real world." "No," Jessica's voice carried her mother's steel. "You tried to break me, but here's what you never understood. I wasn't just your daughter. I was hers. And her strength, her courage, her love for justice, that lives in me." She pulled out another document, a psychiatric evaluation conducted since Sterling's arrest. "The doctor you paid to declare me unstable, he's under investigation now, along with every other professional you bribed to build your case against me." Sterling's hands clenched. The foundation needs truth," Jessica cut in. "It needs transparency, accountability, and a return to its original mission, Mom's mission." She leaned forward. Did you know Marcus's mother started her new treatment yesterday? The kind of treatment your theft denied to hundreds of families. Something flickered in Sterling's eyes. Not remorse exactly, but perhaps the first recognition of consequences. The boy, the janitor's son, he was the catalyst for all this, wasn't he? He was the first person to really see me, Jessica replied. To see past your careful facade of concern, your manufactured narrative about my instability. He saw what Mom always wanted for me, the chance to be strong in my own way, not broken into your kind of strength. She stood gathering her mother's materials. The FBI found the offshore accounts, by the way. All of them. Every dollar you stole will be traced, recovered, and returned to the families you hurt. Mom's final evidence file made sure of that. You'll destroy everything I built, Sterling said, but his voice had lost its power. No. Jessica's smile held a hint of sadness. I'm going to rebuild everything you destroyed, starting with the truth about Mom's murder. Sterling's facade cracked completely. You can't. There's no evidence. The brake line specialist you hired? Jessica placed one final document on the table. He's talking to the FBI right now. Turns out Mom had evidence about him too. Payments, instructions, everything. She knew you were planning something. She just didn't know exactly when. She gathered her things, standing tall like Catherine had in her final days. I'm not here for revenge, Father. I'm here to tell you that your power is broken. Your network is exposed. Your careful web of lies is unraveling, thread by thread. At the door, she turned back one last time. Mom wrote something the day she died. The truth doesn't need power to prevail. It just needs one voice brave enough to speak it. You silenced her voice, but you forgot something crucial. Sterling looked up, seeing Catherine's determination shining through his daughter's eyes. You forgot that truth like love passes from mother to daughter. And my voice? It's just getting started. Outside, Marcus waited with quiet support. You okay? Jessica nodded, feeling lighter somehow. He looked smaller now, less powerful, like all bullies do when their weapons are taken away. They walked through the detention center's sterile halls, past guards and checkpoints, emerging into the bright afternoon sun. On the street, a group of Foundation families waited with signs of support, not just for Jessica, but for every truth she now represented. Ready? Marcus asked as reporters approached. Jessica touched her mother's diary, feeling its weight like a shield of courage. Mom was ready 8 years ago. I'm just continuing her fight. The cameras flashed as Jessica Sterling stepped into the light, no longer a victim of her father's manipulation, but a warrior for her mother's justice. Behind her, through the detention center's barred windows, Richard Sterling watched his carefully constructed world crumble, one revealed truth at a time. Le Magnifique buzzed with unusual energy for a Monday morning. The restaurant had become an unofficial headquarters for what the media was calling the Sterling Foundation Revolution. In the private dining room where it had all begun, Jessica sat with Marcus, surrounded by stacks of case files and a growing team of investigators. 3 more Foundation directors arrested overnight, Agent Martinez reported, spreading photographs across the table. Each one connected to your father's network, each one using the same methods to divert funds meant for medical care. Marcus studied the faces of the arrested directors, men and women who had hidden their greed behind charitable masks. How many families affected so far? Over 1,000, Jessica answered, her fingers tracing a list of names. But that's just from the foundations we've identified. The FBI thinks there could be dozens more. The door opened as Maurice entered with Mr. Chen and a distinguished-looking woman in her 60s. Jessica, Mr. Chen said softly, I'd like you to meet someone. This is Margaret Wu, the judge your mother was planning to take her evidence to, the one she never reached. Judge Wu's eyes were kind, but carried the weight of 8 years' regret. I knew Catherine was gathering evidence. We had a meeting scheduled for the morning after. She paused, composing herself. When I heard about the accident, I knew it wasn't random, but without her documentation, without proof. Now we have proof, Jessica said firmly, pulling out her mother's files. And we have something else. Witnesses coming forward, people who stayed silent, for years out of fear. As if on cue, Sarah, the veteran server who had watched Jessica grow up at Le Magnifique, entered with a new stack of statements. More restaurant staff willing to testify about the night your mother died, about your father's abuse, about everything. The restaurant's security cameras hummed quietly overhead, no longer tools of control but witnesses to justice unfolding. Through the dining room windows, they could see news vans still parked along the street, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like modern totems of truth-telling. "The Foundation Board meets in an hour," Mr. Chen reminded them. "The first official meeting with you as chairwoman, Jessica. Are you ready?" Jessica stood, smoothing her mother's old blazer that she'd found carefully preserved in the mansion's attic. "I've been ready since the day Mom died. I just didn't know it yet." Marcus watched her transformation with quiet pride. Gone was the frightened girl who had absorbed her father's abuse in silence. In her place stood a leader who carried her mother's strength and her own hard-won wisdom. "There's something else you should see," Agent Martinez said, opening her laptop. "Security footage from other restaurants, other venues. Your father's network didn't just operate at Le Magnifique. The screen filled with images, other young heirs being systematically broken, other whistleblowers being silenced, other families being denied help. It was never just about money," Judge Wu observed. "It was about power, about controlling the next generation to maintain their corrupt system." "But they forgot something," Marcus added, thinking of his father's wisdom. "They forgot that truth doesn't care about power. It only cares about coming to light." The morning sun streamed through Le Magnifique's windows, catching the crystals, glasses that had witnessed so much. Outside, another group of families had gathered, not in protest now, but in support. Many held photographs of loved ones who had been denied care. Others carried signs celebrating the Foundation's new direction. Jessica touched the window gently. "They're not just here for justice anymore. They're here for change. Real change. Change you're leading," Marcus reminded her. "Change your mother." "Started," Morris cleared his throat. "The press is asking for a statement before the board meeting. They're calling it the Sterling Reformation, how one daughter's courage is transforming the entire charitable foundation system." "No," Jessica said firmly. "This isn't about one person's courage. It's about all of us. The servers who watched and remembered, the families who never stopped fighting, the invisible ones who finally chose to be seen." She turned to Marcus. "It's about a boy who saw someone crying and decided to do something about it, who taught me that sometimes the greatest acts of justice start with the smallest choices." Judge Wu smiled. "Catherine would be proud, not just of your courage, but of your understanding. She always said that true change doesn't come from the top down. It rises from the bottom up, from those who have the most to lose and the most to give." Through the kitchen doors, they could hear the staff preparing for lunch service. Life at Le Magnifique continued, but everything had changed. The private dining room was no longer a stage for power plays and abuse, but a war room for justice. The security cameras no longer watched for weakness, but documented strength. "It's time," Mr. Chen said gently, checking his watch. "The board is waiting." Jessica gathered her mother's files, her inheritance of truth rather than wealth. Then, "Let's not keep justice waiting any longer. We have a foundation to rebuild, families to help, and a legacy to honor." As they moved toward the door, Marcus caught a glimpse of their reflection in the restaurant's mirrors. The wealthy heiress and the janitor's son, united in purpose, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes come from the most unexpected alliances. Preston Memorial Hospital's new cancer wing gleamed in the morning light, its windows reflecting the sunrise. Jessica stood beside Marcus in the lobby, watching as his mother was wheeled out of her final treatment session. Marie Washington's face, though tired, shone with the kind of hope that only survivors understand. "The doctors say I'm in remission," Marie announced, her smile brightening the sterile hospital corridor. The experimental treatment worked, the kind of treatment that would have been impossible without the Foundation's help. Jessica squeezed Marcus's hand as he knelt beside his mother's wheelchair. 1 month had passed since Richard Sterling's arrest, but the ripples of change continued to spread. The Catherine Sterling Memorial Cancer Research Fund, established in the Foundation's restructuring, had already helped dozens of families like the Washingtons. "You're our first success story," Jessica told Marie, "but not our last." The board approved funding for 300 more patients yesterday. The hospital's administrative director, Dr. Emily Chen, Mr. Chen's daughter, approached with a tablet displaying the latest statistics. The Foundation's new transparency protocols are becoming the industry standard. 3 other major healthcare foundations have adopted our model. They moved through the hospital corridors, passing walls adorned with photographs, Catherine Sterling's legacy gallery, documenting both the darkness of the past and the promise of the future. Each image told a story. Families denied care under the old regime, now receiving life-saving treatments. Corrupt directors being led away in handcuffs. Jessica and Marcus testifying before congressional committees on foundation reform. In the pediatric oncology ward, a new playroom bore Catherine's name. Children whose families had once been turned away now received care regardless of their ability to pay. The sound of their laughter echoed through the halls, the sweetest music of justice served. "Your mother would have loved this," Marie said softly to Jessica. "Not just the medical care, but the transformation, the way you've turned pain into purpose." Jessica touched a photograph of her mother, this one showing Catherine in her early days at the Foundation, her eyes alight with the same passion for helping others that now drove her daughter. She knew the truth would come out eventually. She just had to trust that someone would be brave enough to speak it. "Someone was," Marcus said, looking at Jessica with quiet pride. "Several someones." They reached the hospital's main entrance, where a small crowd had gathered. Former Foundation victims, now Foundation beneficiaries, waited to celebrate Marie's recovery. Among them stood James Washington, his janitor's uniform replaced today by a suit he'd bought specially for this occasion. "Look at this," he said, embracing his wife. "All these people, all these stories of healing. This is what justice looks like." The crowd parted as another figure approached, Judge Wu, carrying a thick folder of legal documents. "The final indictments just came through," she announced. 17 Foundation directors in total across 12 states. The entire network exposed at last. Jessica accepted the folder, recognizing some of the names, her father's conspirators, men and women who had built empires on stolen hope. And the recovery of funds, over $200 million identified so far, the judge confirmed, all being redirected back to patient care and research. The Sterling Foundation is now the model for charitable oversight reform. Marcus watched as his mother stood carefully from her wheelchair, stronger each day. Around them, other patients and families shared similar stories of recovery, not just from illness, but from the despair of being denied care by a corrupt system. "You know what I remember most?" Marie said suddenly, looking at her son. "The night you came home from the restaurant talking about a girl who needed someone to see her pain. You didn't know then that by helping her, you'd end up helping so many others, including your own mother." The morning sun climbed higher, filling the hospital atrium with natural light. Outside, construction crews worked on the Foundation's next project, a free clinic named after Catherine Sterling, designed to ensure that no family would ever again be denied basic medical care. "We're not finished," Jessica said, her voice carrying her mother's determination. "There are more foundations to investigate, more families to help, more systems to reform." "But now we know how," Marcus added. "We know that change doesn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it comes from simple acts of seeing someone's pain and choosing to do something about it." Marie Washington stood straighter, her strength returning not just to her body, but to her spirit. "Sometimes," she said wisely, "the greatest healing happens when we help others heal." The group moved toward the hospital's garden, where a small celebration awaited. Above them, a banner caught the breeze. "The Catherine Sterling Legacy. Truth heals all wounds." Jessica paused, watching the gathered families, all connected now by something stronger than pain or illness. Connected by the power of truth to transform, of justice to heal, of love to light the way forward. Mom would have loved this most of all, she said softly. Not the buildings or programs, but this, people helping people, strength flowing from truth, healing spreading like morning light. Around them, the hospital hummed with new life, new hope, new beginnings. The dark days of Richard Sterling's reign were ending, replaced by the bright promise of his daughter's vision, a vision inherited from a mother who had died protecting the truth that would eventually set them all free. The federal courthouse was packed for Richard Sterling's sentencing hearing. Unlike his bail hearing months ago, today's crowd filled every seat, their silence heavy with anticipation. Jessica sat in the front row between Marcus and Mr. Chen, her mother's diary resting in her lap like a shield. Sterling appeared markedly changed, his designer suits replaced by prison orange, his commanding presence diminished by months in detention. But it was his eyes that showed the greatest transformation. The cold arrogance had given way to something else entirely, fear. "The defendant will rise," Judge Matthews commanded. Sterling stood shakily, his handcuffs catching the fluorescent light. "Before we proceed with sentencing, the court has been informed of new evidence concerning Catherine Sterling's death. Agent Martinez." The FBI agent approached the bench, carrying a familiar leather briefcase, the one Maurice had kept hidden. "For 8 years, Your Honor, we've received a full confession from Thomas Reed, the mechanic Mr. Sterling hired to tamper with Catherine Sterling's brake lines." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Sterling's shoulders stiffened as Agent Martinez continued. "Mr. Reed provided detailed records of payment instructions and, most significantly, an audio recording of his conversation with Mr. Sterling the night before Catherine's death." The courtroom speakers crackled to life, and Richard Sterling's solemn voice, 8 years younger but unmistakable, filled the room. "Make it look like an accident. Clean, simple. She takes that mountain road every morning. No one will question it." Jessica's hands tightened around her mother's diary as her father's voice continued. "Once she's gone, I'll handle Jessica. A few years of carefully documented instability, and the foundation stays under my control. No one will ever find Catherine's evidence." The recording ended, leaving a silence so profound it seemed to pulse. Judge Matthews leaned forward. "Mr. Sterling, in light of this new evidence, the court is prepared to add first-degree murder charges to your sentence. Do you have anything to say?" Sterling turned slowly, his eyes finding his daughter's. For a moment, the mask slipped completely, revealing not a powerful man, but a cornered one. "I did it for the family," he whispered. "For our legacy." "No." Jessica's voice cut through his weak defense as she stood. "You did it for power. But you forgot the most important lesson Mom taught me. True legacy isn't built on power. It's built on truth." She opened her mother's diary, reading from the final entry. "If you're reading this, Jessica, remember, our real legacy isn't in the foundation's money or the Sterling name. It's in the lives we touch, the truth we speak, the justice we serve. Some men build empires on lies. We'll build something stronger, a legacy of light." Judge Matthews nodded gravely. "Richard Sterling, you have been found guilty of financial fraud, corruption, conspiracy, and now the premeditated murder of Catherine Sterling. This court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The gavel's strike echoed like thunder. As Sterling was led away, he called out one last time, "Jessica, please." "Goodbye, Father," she said firmly. Mom's truth won after all. Outside the courthouse, the steps were crowded with Foundation families, not protesters now, but witnesses to justice. Marie Washington stood with her husband and son, her recovery a living testament to the changes Jessica had implemented. "The Foundation's quarterly report," Mr. Chen said quietly, handing Jessica a tablet. "Every dollar tracked, every patient helped, every life touched, all transparent, all public. Just as your mother wanted." Marcus touched her shoulder gently. "Want to know something amazing? The security cameras at Le Magnifique captured everything that first night. Not just your father's abuse, but my decision to help. Maurice kept that footage too. He said sometimes the smallest choices create the biggest changes. Jessica smiled, thinking of that night that seemed so long ago now. You saw me when I was invisible, just like Mom saw the truth when everyone else looked away. They walked down the courthouse steps together, past reporters and cameras, past the families holding photos of loved ones now receiving care, past the visible signs of invisible changes. The Foundation Board meets tomorrow, Mr. Chen reminded her. The new transparency protocols go into effect across all partner organizations. Catherine's protocol, Jessica nodded, ensuring no foundation can ever hide corruption behind charitable walls again. At the bottom of the steps, they paused. The morning sun had broken through the clouds, casting long shadows behind them, but illuminating the path ahead. You know what my dad always says? Marcus smiled. Sometimes God makes us invisible so we can see what others can't. But sometimes He makes us visible again so we can help others see the truth. Jessica touched her mother's diary, feeling its weight. Not a burden now, but a foundation for something new. Mom saw the truth. She died protecting it. But she trusted that someday someone would be brave enough to speak it. Not someone, Marcus corrected gently. You, her daughter. The one person Richard Sterling couldn't break because you carried something stronger than his lies. You carried her courage. The courthouse behind them stood as a monument to justice served. But ahead lay something even more powerful, a future built on truth, transparency, and the kind of strength that comes not from power over others, but from standing up for what's right. Ready? Marcus asked, as more Foundation families approached to share their stories of healing and hope. Jessica straightened, every inch her mother's daughter, ready to continue Mom's legacy, the real one, not of power, but of light. 1 month after Richard Sterling's sentencing, Le Magnifique hosted a different kind of gathering. The private dining room where it had all begun was transformed, its tables filled not with power brokers, but with families, those who had suffered under the old regime and those now blossoming under the new. Jessica stood at the head table, watching as Marcus helped his mother to her seat. Marie Washington, now in full remission, had become a symbol of the Foundation's transformation. Her story of denial, struggle, and ultimate triumph had inspired hundreds of other families to come forward. The final audit numbers are in, Mr. Chen announced, standing to address the room. Over $300 million recovered from corrupt foundations nationwide, every penny being redirected to patient care and research. Morris moved through the room with a bottle of champagne, his steps lighter now that the weight of 8 years' secrets had been lifted. He paused at Jessica's table, pouring a special toast. To Catherine, he said softly, who showed us that truth has no expiration date. The restaurant's security cameras still hummed overhead, but they served a different purpose now. Instead of monitoring for weakness, they documented strength, recording stories of survival, healing, and transformation for the Foundation's new transparency initiative. We have something to show you, Marcus said, nodding to Sarah, who dimmed the lights. A projector screen descended from the ceiling, and familiar footage began to play. The night everything changed, when a janitor's son saw past wealth and power to recognize a cry for help. But the video didn't stop there. It continued, showing moments from the past month, families reuniting in hospital rooms, researchers returning to laboratories, Foundation board meetings conducted in full public view. A chronicle of change captured by the very cameras once used to maintain control. Your mother would be proud, Maria whispered to Jessica. The housekeeper, now the Foundation's family liaison officer, had transformed her own pain into purpose. Not just of the changes you've made, but of the way you've made them, with transparency, compassion, and strength. Judge Wu stood next, her judicial robes replaced by elegant evening wear. The Catherine Sterling Transparency Act passed the state legislature this morning, she announced. All charitable foundations must now adhere to public oversight protocols. The corruption that claimed Catherine's life will never again find shelter in shadows. Applause filled the room, but Jessica's attention was drawn to a quiet corner where two teenagers sat together, May Chen and a young girl named Sarah Martinez, daughter of the FBI agent who had helped break the case. They were part of the Foundation's new Youth Advisory Board, ensuring that the next generation would carry forward the lessons of truth and justice. Sometimes, Marcus said, following her gaze, the best way to heal from trauma is to help others heal. Jessica nodded, touching her mother's diary. Mom wrote something similar in her last entry. The truth isn't just about exposing lies, it's about lighting the way forward for others. The evening continued with more stories shared, more tears shed, more healing embraced. Le Magnifique, once a stage for power plays and abuse, had become a sanctuary of transformation. The crystal glasses that had witnessed so much pain now reflected light and hope. The Foundation received 50 new applications this week, Mr. Chen reported quietly. Families who never thought they'd have a chance at experimental treatments, research projects that could change the future of medicine. And each one will be evaluated transparently, Jessica added, with public oversight and clear documentation. No more backroom deals, no more diverted funds. Marie Washington stood carefully, her voice carrying across the room. When I was first diagnosed, the Foundation's rejection felt like a death sentence. But now I understand. Sometimes the darkest moments lead us to the brightest futures. My son saw someone crying and chose to help. That choice didn't just save one person, it saved hundreds. Marcus squeezed his mother's hand as she continued. Today, I'm not just a survivor of cancer, I'm a survivor of a corrupt system that tried to value profit over people. But thanks to Catherine Sterling's courage, carried forward by her daughter and my son, that system is being rebuilt into something beautiful. Jessica rose, emotion thick in her throat. This room holds so many stories of pain transformed into purpose, of silence broken by truth, of invisible people choosing to be seen. My father thought he could build a legacy on lies, but Mom knew better. She knew that real legacy is built on light. The evening sun slanted through Le Magnifique's windows, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with possibility. In the kitchen, Chef Michel prepared a special dessert, Catherine's favorite, prepared from a recipe she had once shared with him in confidence. To light, Marcus proposed, raising his glass. To truth, Jessica added. To healing, Marie joined. We are here for it. The toast spread through the room, voices joining in a chorus of celebration and remembrance. Outside, the city continued its evening rhythm, but inside Le Magnifique, something profound was happening. The final transformation of pain into purpose, of darkness into dawn. 6 months later, the Sterling mansion had been transformed. The imposing gates that once symbolized exclusion now stood permanently open, welcoming a steady stream of visitors to the Catherine Sterling Memorial Foundation Center. The security cameras that had once monitored Jessica's every move now documented stories of healing, hope, and transformation. Jessica stood in her mother's former study, now the heart of the Foundation's Transparency Initiative, where Richard Sterling had once plotted corruption. Dozens of computer screens displayed real-time tracking of every Foundation dollar, every grant application, every life touched by Catherine's legacy. The final numbers from the first 6 months, Marcus said, entering with a tablet. He'd traded his janitor's uniform for business casual, though he still insisted on helping maintain the building himself. A reminder, he said, that no work was invisible if it served a greater purpose. Over 1,000 families helped, he continued, 300 research grants funded, and 17 corrupt foundations reformed under the Catherine Sterling protocols. He paused, smiling, and one very special patient in complete remission. As if on cue, Marie Washington appeared in the doorway, accompanied by Judge Wu and Mr. Chen. She moved with renewed vigor, her cancer battle now a testimony to the Foundation's new mission. The Congressional Committee approved the national expansion, Judge Wu announced. The transparency protocols will become federal law next month. Catherine's legacy is about to go nationwide. Jessica touched the photograph on her desk. Her mother at that final charity gala, her eyes alight with purpose. She knew this day would come. Not exactly like this, maybe, but she knew truth would eventually win. Truth had some help, Mr. Chen noted, looking meaningfully at Marcus, from those who chose to see what others ignored. The mansion's grand staircase, once a symbol of Richard Sterling's power, now led to a museum chronicling both the darkness of the past and the light of transformation. Visitors could trace the Foundation's journey from corruption to redemption, understanding how truth, once spoken, could change everything. The new pediatric wing opens next week, Marie reported. 30 beds, all reserved for families who couldn't afford care under the old system, each room named after someone who helped expose the truth, including the Catherine Sterling Intensive Care Unit, Marcus added, and the Maria Washington Recovery Center. Jessica moved to the mansion's large windows, watching as another tour group explored the grounds. The formal gardens had been replanted with healing herbs and meditation spaces, transforming Richard Sterling's showpiece into a place of genuine comfort. "You know what's remarkable?" she said softly. 6 months ago, this house felt like a prison. Now it feels like what your mother always wanted it to be, Marcus finished. A place where truth lights the way forward. The sound of children's laughter drifted up from the garden, where the Foundation's youth program was in session. Young people learning about transparency, justice, and the power of speaking truth to power. Among them was Mei Chen, now leading workshops on recognizing and reporting corruption. "The latest application just came in," Marie said, checking her phone. "A small foundation in Michigan asking for help implementing the Catherine Sterling protocols. That makes 23 states now." Judge Wu smiled. "Catherine used to say that truth was like a sunrise, unstoppable once it starts. She just needed someone brave enough to break the dawn." "She needed all of us," Jessica corrected. "The invisible ones who chose to be seen, the silent ones who chose to speak, the broken ones who chose to heal by helping others heal." Marcus touched the wall where a security camera had once monitored Jessica's every move. Now it captured something else. Stories of transformation, testimonies of healing, proof that light always overcomes darkness when truth is finally spoken. "Your father's final appeal was denied this morning," Judge Wu mentioned quietly. "He'll serve his full sentence." Jessica nodded, feeling not triumph, but a quiet peace. He chose power over truth, corruption over justice, control over love. But in doing so, he taught me what Mom always knew, that real strength isn't in what we take from others, but in what we give back. The afternoon sun streamed through the mansion's windows, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with possibility. In the garden below, more families arrived for the Foundation's support group, each carrying stories of struggle, survival, and hope. "Ready for the board meeting?" Marcus asked, offering his arm. Jessica gathered her mother's diary and the latest transparency reports. Ready to continue what Mom started, ready to keep building her real legacy. They walked together through the transformed mansion, past the walls that had once imprisoned truth but now celebrated it. At the boardroom entrance, they paused, looking at the words newly etched above the door, Catherine's final diary entry, now a mandate for the future. "Truth needs no power but its own light. Justice needs no weapon but its own voice. Love needs no defense but its own courage to shine." The boardroom filled with people who had chosen truth over power, justice over privilege, light over darkness. Outside, the sun touched the gardens. Healing herbs, the children's laughter echoed through reformed halls, and Catherine Sterling's legacy lived on, not in wealth or power, but in the unstoppable force of truth finally spoken, justice finally served, and love finally free to light the way forward. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of the transformative power of truth, the healing force of justice, and the unstoppable strength of those who choose to stand up for what's right.